Joining us now on the line for our Zambian market update is Brian Tembo. He's the Chief Executive of the Lusaka Stock Exchange. Brian, good morning. Lovely to have you all the way from Lusaka. Let's start by looking at one of the big players on the stock exchange, in particular Lafarge. And let's talk about this in the context of the compliance issues and the compliance drives that we are seeing by the stock exchange.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Last week we had Lafarge start the process of complying with a requirement in our listing rules, which is a requirement for the public to hold a minimum of 25% in the listed companies. And Lafarge was one of the companies that fell under that particular threshold, but commenced the process of complying with that requirement. And last week, we see them leading both the number of trades and turnover. They had about US dollar equivalent 55 million US worth of trades last week, which is about 354 million kwacha. The other stock that also accounted for a good size of the turnover is Copperbelt Energy Corporation.
Yes.
That was also conducting that process after the mandatory offer of ensuring that they maintain the minimum public float.
Now, Brian, you also have positive developments in the sense of a new listing and in particular a medium note program that's being listed on the stock exchange. Give us some insight behind that listing and what this means for the stock exchange.
We've had an interesting, I think, trend where we're seeing a number of microfinance organizations come to the market to raise funds for on lending. In fact, tomorrow we're having, it's a loose tradition of having listing ceremonies for companies that actually, list either on the bond market or on the equity market. So this particular one is Focus Financial Services. It's a local company that was established in 2010. They have issued a tranche as part of their 400 million kwacha medium-term note program. The interesting thing about this particular one is that it's, for on lending to SMEs. So you have the exchange indirectly, if you will, through these various financial institutions like Focus, facilitating the transmission or the raising of these relatively cheaper funds for onward lending to SMEs.
And if we were to look at the onward lending to SMEs, Brian, that you speak of now, should that happen, what type of growth does this lend to the stock exchange? And in particular, how big is the SME sector in Lusaka?
It's a bit difficult to say in terms of actual size, but the figures suggest that we have in excess of 15,000 registered SMEs in the country. A good number of them obviously will be in the capital. But I think what this really suggests is that we have a lot of now interest in SMEs as, that particular engine sector that will grow the economy moving forward. And in particular to the exchange, what we are seeing from Focus is that complementary effort to bridge that financing gap that exists. And this ties in very well with what the LUSA is doing in launching an alternative market, particularly focused at facilitating access to the exchange by SMEs.
Brian, thank you so much for making the time to join us. We look forward to catching up with you again to learn what the Lusaka Stock Exchange is doing. That's the Chief Executive of the Lusaka Stock Exchange.